Big welcome, Einar Boson.
Thank you.
Good to have you here. So, I asked you a few weeks ago when we were doing a surrendered leadership week together, and you led something on how you've integrated a Buddhist kind of perspective or what you've been inspired from in terms of Buddhism. And it went down really well. And yeah, I took a rest in that session, and when I came back, I was like, "Oh, I want to get that transmission from you." So I was like, "Oh, maybe we could do it here." And yeah, so thank you for agreeing to this. And I just want to say a few things because some people might not know that you're actually a senior leader with us, Transformational Connection, and you've been practicing. It's over 6 years, isn't it? Maybe 7 or 8, and you've been yeah, very committed to both your spiritual practice a lot through Buddhism, but I think it's broader than that. But you've been deep into surrendered leadership, especially, but yeah, leading circling or transformational connection, as we should call it now, and yeah, leading weekends. And there's something like about your leadership, and people imagine if they haven't met you before can notice already that there's a kind of detachment or non-attachment sense I have around you. Like we spent a lot of time together this last week, and I was like, oh man, when I'm around you, I start to feel fast.
Mm.
And I don't get that feeling that often around people. Uh, and it was good for me to see, yeah, kind of habitual ways that I show up. So yeah, before we go back into this Buddhist like distinctions, which yeah, I've got a good feel for as well. Just wondered if you wanted to say anything about yeah, your journey with the practice and how yeah, Buddhism was kind of, I imagine it was kind of interpenetrative, like what you were doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think my journey started when obviously any journey starts at the Big Bang and then there's like a lot of stuff happening. We'll jump in at like 21, my age, and there's something, somehow I end up in circumstances where I try psychedelics, and I'm like a very, as I would describe it, quite a strong in suppressing emotion and being absorbed in my abstract mind, studying computer science, doing math, all that stuff.
Mm.
And during this first psychedelic trip I had, I accidentally climbed myself into a non-dual experience that was so far outside of anything I had ever experienced or thought was possible to experience that it that I became quite, in a way, disoriented, but also very interested.
Mm. Can you describe that experience at all?
Yeah, I can try. It happened that I was on psychedelics. I was sitting like this, and I was observing just like my experience, and it was like moving a bit more than usual. And I had this experience of being someone, like my whole experience was like a surface in a way. And there was like this me that was looking at the surface. And as I was experiencing that, it not as a thought, but it became very clear that as I was observing myself, observing the surface, I was actually someone observing, like there was a new self happening, a new subject, observing the object. And as I noticed that, I was another subject, observing the subject, observing the subject, observing the object, and this kept happening, and I felt like I was going insane until my attention was grabbed by something else, and I was like, okay, doing stuff a little bit more normally. And then again, as I came to rest somewhere, this started happening. And when that had happened, like I had get caught in this loop, as I called it then, like this climbing outwards of subject perceiving subject perceiving subject. I remembered from my math classes how we were dealing with similar structures, where there's like this ancient Greek paradox of like, if you're going to move from one place to another place, you first have to traverse half the distance. And then with what's left, you have to traverse half the distance. And then with what's left, you have to traverse half the distance. And like adding all this up, eventually, in our experience, you do get to where you're going. But there's some kind of paradoxical thing here, like a half plus a fourth plus an eighth plus a 16th, and so on and so on. It just never ends.
Hmm.
Seems like you never arrive, but you do arrive. And there's a way in which like how you handle that in math is that you have to like allow this progression to continue while stepping out of it, observing how the structure works. It does continue, but you don't have to participate in it in a way. And however close you need it to come to one, there are tools to make it that close. So you can use it as if it's one.
Hmm.
And somehow just remembering that made me able to exit this progression. And suddenly I was no longer a subject observing an object. I was just everything. And even that doesn't quite capture it, because there wasn't anybody being anything. It was just everything arising at the same time.
Was there a feeling sense with that, or is it like that it's almost another kind of experiencing?
It's a very different kind of experience. I don't remember if I was not attuned to feelings at that time in my life.
Yeah.
I don't remember that. It was more like unknown totality, and it was the first. I'm raised in Sweden, which is a fairly atheist culture, and my parents are atheists. I don't have any background religious vocabulary, or like
Hmm.
my idea of religion was collective coping mechanisms, and what I knew was natural science, math. So this doesn't didn't really make any sense to me. And
Well,
as
it's amazing that mathematics actually, and it's not surprising because, of course, it's like the most abstract of the most abstract, and sometimes people think abstract it means kind of non-real or like just mind. But
mm,
abstract is just trying to take out the most refined sense of what's here. So if you do that with the most clean symbols, which numbers seem to be, it's of course you're going to start getting to some wacky stuff. And yeah, people who've gone deeper mathematics know that well. So in a way,
a
it
lot
doesn't
of like
surprise me.
interplay,
Yeah,
a lot of interplay between mathematics and psychedelics and these like mysticism.
yeah, yeah.
And both like the people who developed these tools, these mathematical tools, was Leibniz and Newton, and they were both mystics also.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, there was an amazing what's it? There's a guy who does a lot of documentaries on the cosmos. I can't remember his name, a black guy. Um and
Tyson, Neil deGrasse Tyson or something.
yeah, yeah, he's very famous. I remember he did a kind of I think it was an episode on Newton, and it was amazing. But it was just turned out I'd read a biography of Newton, and it's not something I normally do. It was just I was camping, and this book was on a shelf, so I read it. But I loved it. It was so good learning about his life, like
Mm.
unbelievable. Like he wasn't just a scientist. Um, but it was amazing that at the end of this series, he said, "Oh yeah, by the way, he also did some studies of alchemy, but they came to nothing." And I was like, well, maybe that was a big part of why he
Mm.
discovered all the things he did in science, because he had this mystical leaning. And obviously, if you see alchemy as just an objective science, you're going to miss that it was a way. I think a lot of it was how they had to kind of pretend it was a science because it was dangerous to not just be kind of a fundamentalist Christian. Or anyway, that's so it's so it seems like you, yeah, found yourself in a non-dual experience.
Yeah, and it was in trying to figure that out that I eventually found, well, some different thinkers, but mainly Alan Watts, I guess, who led me. And the way he spoke about the world with like a Zen Buddhist tint, or more than a tint, I guess, but like through Zen Buddhism, articulating that perspective or those thoughts, I felt he is talking about that experience I had. And so that became like a vocabulary that I tried to understand, because I was, well, the more I understood of it and the more I experienced of this, starting to do meditation and also continuing a bit with psychedelics,
Hmm.
the more it started to make sense to me that this is actually something that you can integrate into your everyday life. It doesn't have to be experienced only as peak experiences in psychedelics or at the end of meditation retreats. You can have this infuse your whole being, and that leads to a lot more happiness and ease.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that transition for me of like I got so engrossed in spirituality and but it came after I went on the journey with philosophy and psychotherapy. And so
Mm.
I also came from that atheist background. But I remember one time just kind of being in my bed, kind of I wasn't really trying anything, but suddenly my sense of self just folded. And then I was like, oh, I'm not here. But it's not exactly how it happened, but that's the best way to describe it.
Mm.
But the time it happened most impressively, I was once just walking onto a train station, but we were like doing quite a lot of deep kind of relational practice at the time. And then just suddenly it was just like, I'm totally free was the realization. And it was just such a kind of pleasurable immersion and experience. And then that kind of faded. But when it stayed the most, it was actually I had a tiny bit of marijuana, but mostly I was in this experience. I just graduated from a transformational coaching and integral coaching, and it was like a kind of initiation. And I've done weed before, and it was like, yeah, it's kind of a strong state experience, but it's more subtle body. It's not like coming out. So I put it more down to like this initiation I was in, but it was just like being there and suddenly everything around me was like a manifestation of love, like even the yellow walls. Like my friend was talking to me and it was so intense because it was like the amount of love in a human being to put these symbols into meaning and try and communicate to each other. It was like just feeling the source of everything being rooted in love. And even the tables and how they were arranged in the room, there was music coming. I was like, oh my God, this music is like, so it wasn't the normal consciousness.
Mm.
But then suddenly this kind of folding, and it was like it was just the people in the cafe. It wasn't me observing them. It was just like a pure experience. So it seems like this kind of sense you had was like a surprise. You weren't looking for it, and then that took you on the path, like it was the call to action.
Mm. Yeah, and I did. After that, I learned to meditate in some different ways. Went to some retreats. Did some practices and continued listening and reading. Um, I mean, not only Buddhism, also Sufism and Christian mysticism, and mostly reading
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah.
Uh, I think it's, for me, it seems important to have more than one map. There are quite, I think it's an advantage to use different, quite different maps, so you don't start mixing up what is your actual experience with what is somebody else's articulation of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, after, I guess, what did we say, 6, 7 years ago that I started with this. So after some almost 15 years into doing those things, I found surrender leadership. And being, well, I guess being birthday circled the first time was quite strong for me. It was the first time I had felt anyone actually interested in my inner world.
Hmm.
And yeah, I guess that
Who
was,
who was that?
I think it was Peter.
Nice. Peter Montcas. Nice.
Yeah.
So,
And I
so
also had,
that
huh?
yeah, so that was quite an ex like that there was a real sense of how someone could actually be with you in your inner world, was it? Or is it just the simple curiosity?
I think, I mean, I think I didn't really get what it was at first. So for me, it was more like I got to articulate the way in which I attended the world, and people were actually interested with at least apparent interest.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think the whole like surrender leadership circling, what it opened up for me was like a relational aspect to being in the world. That the Buddhist methods have like, see it, for me at least, like the paths, the places I have been, the method is a lot to sit alone and really in detail examine your experience or like allow it in some ways, but it's not done in relationship.
Yeah.
And so for me, a lot of my, what do I say? A lot of the held contractions I had and have are from relational wounding. And so it wasn't until I started doing surrender leadership that I started to like really be provoked and have strong. Okay, this is not entirely true, but much more when I found that it became that I got provoked
Mm.
in the relational, and I got to experience how scared I actually was of people. I didn't really know. It was just a constant backdrop of fear when I was relating with people that I had suppressed.
That's so amazing that like when you start to become more present in relationship, almost almost everyone that I've practiced with will either find out like, oh, I'm actually defending from being with people in some way, or I'm terrified, or that they don't I simply don't feel connection. Like if you ask like, do you like once they start to be able to speak like to what they are actually finding out rather than still, in the beginning, you don't even realize you don't even share what you're finding out. You're just sharing what you always say.
Mm.
But then when you start to practice more and you're able to be like, well, actually, this is what's here, which usually just brings too much vulnerability at first, but you start to be able to get used to that. But a lot of people will just be like, I don't feel connected in some way to anyone or even myself. And it doesn't even make sense to say it because it's like, I almost don't know what that means, but that's what it feels like. And it seems like you had a, yeah, more the kind of, wow, I'm actually afraid of others.
Yeah, I mean, initially, yeah, my experience early in surrender leadership was, well, I guess it's the best articulated in describing how it was for me at my first SAS weekend.
Mm.
Like an SAS weekend, this is like a 6-month container we run with training people in presence and holding presence for others. And one of these we call it weekend, but it's 4 days. And on the first day in the big circle, we were like 20 people, something. I didn't say anything. And this is like we're sitting there for maybe 2 hours in a group of 20 people, and people are sharing about their experience. And I didn't. Because like my experience was listening, and like there were like these attachment points or like places where I could enter, and then I like prepare what I'm gonna say. But when I'm done preparing, it's moved on. So it's not what I'm gonna say isn't relevant anymore. And this keeps happening. And then afterwards we go into birthday circles and I get circled. And somehow I end up in feeling into what it was like, or like this ever present fear brings me back to my, I don't know what this is called in English, but like when you're in school and around 11 years old, something like that.
Yeah.
And like the circumstances there and how I can't remember what it was like then because then I have to feel it. And just noticing that made me feel it. And I felt young and small, and I started crying, and I was like with this experience of how unsafe I was as a kid.
Mm.
And then obviously a lot of stuff happens. And then the second day, again, I can't say anything in the big circle. And then when we go into birthday circles, I get to lead. And in the feedback round after leading, there's like an experienced facilitator um, that is like being with me. And this was Ronja, who is now also a facilitator with Transformational Connection. Back then, she was a leader in training. And I tell her a little bit about what my experience the day before. And she says, "Oh, I would like to hug that child," because I described it like being this child. And my immediate response is, "I want to kill that child." And then the gravity and reality of that like really hits me, and I started crying again over like how much of my experience unknowingly to me is enacting self-hatred. Like I really hate the person or like the innocent child within me. Like it's not allowed at all.
Mm.
And I constructed something else as a layer on top of it, somebody that I can be that is acceptable in this world.
Yeah. So it sounds like in the practice, I mean, it seems like your mindfulness was already pretty deep then. So you like to notice that you were getting impulses to speak, and then the process of thinking about how to say it well was actually like you could see it, and it was actually too slow to actually be really, really bring yourself forward. I mean, that's maybe one thing that was happening, but then and then getting the attention Because in a birthday circle, you don't have to lead yourself into, which is really actually the strength of surrendered leadership, but the strength of birthday circles, you don't have to like lead yourself into it when you're being circled. So you really get to see what's happening without that. And
Yeah, I
it,
really like this format of like switching between surrender
yeah,
leadership and birthday circling because you get confronted with a lot of stuff in surrender leadership, and then you get help debriefing it in a way, in
yeah.
the like understanding it or like digesting it.
Yeah, and with practice in surrendered leadership, you actually develop the capacities to actually create that attention for yourself, which is actually better in terms
Mm.
of overall in the world. But it's really nice to just have, I mean, the first circle I had, it was like just crying in front of 14 people and no shame to like try and like cover. It was like that was so unusual for me. Like people who know me now would be surprised, but that was so like out of my comfort zone. But it seems like this, yeah, the presence allowed you to notice, yeah, the embedded like childlike sense of, yeah, that sadness and aloneness, or uh, but also the subtle way you were relating to that, and what a surprise that it was so, yeah, self-hating,
Mm.
which actually isn't unusual, but yeah, but quite a shock if you first discover it.
I think I've come to like besides doing like leading surrender leadership and transformational connection together with you and other leaders in transformational connection. I also have training and I work as a body therapist. And I talk to people quite intimately about these things for them. And it seems to me that like, and also the structure that we started talking about from like how
Mm.
awareness is structured, like this samsaric existence, as the Buddhists call it. It seems a very broadly shared experience that as children, we learned that our authentic expression was not allowed, and we constructed something else instead of it. And now we're living this thing that is has this self-censoring loop constantly active to monitor that we don't do anything outside of the rules we learned as children of what is acceptable behavior.
Yeah,
And this practice is a way of discovering that in a fairly, I mean, it sometimes feels quite confronting and provocative, but it's quite gentle, I would say, still.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. When I think the thing, well, just to go back again to, because I did the kind of 10-day Vipassana kind of torture week. Actually, in a way, it was kind of difficult for me, but it was also such a big experience for me. Like I had a few realizations, but it was also just like I came out of that week feeling like somatically cleaned. So it was like, what? Just with my attention, I like feel the healthiest I've ever felt, and like yeah, symptoms I would normally have are just gone. So it was like there's such a deep link between our attention, our thinking, our feeling. So that was amazing, but it was also hard won, like 10 hours of meditation a day for 10 days. So like when I came into being with others in this, yeah, transformational connection way, it was such a surprise to be like bong going into these like state experiences and feeling emotions and like instantly. So there's something about the potential. I mean, maybe that's not for everyone, but the relational potency of like, but what was also different is when I'm sitting in meditation, like this way, like, well, it's, it's not so easy to discover things like, oh, when I'm in a group, I start showing off how clever I am. and at first you think that's just or I get awkward or around women, or I do like whatever it is that we do, and then that just starts happening in a circle. But because the mindfulness is there as well, and others are owning their own vulnerabilities and and getting in touch with deeper energy, you're just being kind of touched by this. And so the emphasis to actually show up, you realize actually how hard it is to show up. And this idea of like be yourself, it's like, yeah, that's not easy because it's like, what self are you? And like then you start discovering that yourself is deeper than your normal awareness. And so to be what's deeper than your normal awareness is quite a journey. Uh, and that's what I hear in your process of like you going through that. And what I like hearing in yours, it's almost like some of the things you realize maybe you didn't have a map for beforehand, totally. So it was really like discovering it kind of clean in a way or direct.
And then looking for maps. Like
Yeah.
it's a very it's nice when you can find someone else having like had similar experiences and mapped it out, because like especially when it's been done over thousands of years, that's a lot of saved effort in trying to map it out. And as soon as I think there's some kind of frontier, like that is what you have maps for, and you can venture out to some distance, but it's limited how far outside of your maps you can really go in a meaningful way. And so venturing out and then mapping it out with your own or someone else's maps. But I think that the important thing is to not do this conceptually and just think you understand the system by figuring out how the symbols relate to each other, but like really have your own
Yeah.
experience and figuring out how do the maps relate to my lived experience.
Yeah. Without the practice, you just can't. And that there's also something there about having others around you because you think you're reading the map and maybe you're good at reading maps. But then when you're sat there with your experience or you're sat there with someone and you're like in a trigger, sometimes you just really, really, really think it's because of what they're doing. It's definitely because of what you're doing. And then when someone just can like in a way that feels like they're with you, just point out like, oh, is there something else happening here? And then you suddenly realize that like, oh yeah, you're also angry and that's playing a role in this.
Mm.
Yeah. It's so it's like the map, the practice, the support seem essential if you're going to go into the unknown.
Mm.
Just the last bit on this, because I'm interested on your experience that I also get this with Buddhism. I get it with the other traditions as well. It's not just like that they mapped it out and it saves energy. I like that aspect, or like it's good to be able to follow something you can trust. Otherwise, like walking through a wood, like you don't know if you're going to end up in a cave or a landslide or a bear around the corner. But but there's something about the lineage that really touches me. It's like human beings over centuries, and maybe probably in times where getting food was challenging and like life was very different, people dedicated themselves to looking at their experience and to finding out if there was more or then being with their inner depths. It's you just get so gives me such a deep feeling to be part of that and to honor that.
Mm. It makes me like one of the things that I sometimes take issue with Buddhism is how much it focuses in on this like thing with suffering, which I think is mostly a misunderstand or like awkward to translate or to really articulate what it means. But there is something with like that the originator is a really affluent prince who never met any hardships until he was of some a certain age, and then he realized that there is old age and disease and death in this world, and it was like it devastated him, and then he went out to find a solution to this problem. And there's something with that experience that is also quite similar to being, yeah, I don't want to make light of how some people have it, but something with being a Westerner today. Like we have, a lot of us, at least most, I would think, have enough food and a lot of stuff, and yet still is really happy. It's really hard to find contentment and happiness and ease, relaxation. So we're in a similar position, like it comes from a similar identification of a problem. Like we have more material wealth than ever, and our mental health is the worst ever. What do we do about that?
Yeah, and I'm reminded of the beginnings. So you started to outline kind of samsara, which is kind of everyday consciousness, the patterns we kind of survive in mostly, or that help structure our world. And then it seems like you saying forms is like the pointer to this, like what we started with in the meditation, direct experience. Like if you really pay attention afresh now, like what is really here when you're paying attention, you're not in automatic
Mm.
pilot. Is that right? Have I heard that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's again here you need to start with your direct experience and try to coordinate the map so that you're not just listening to somebody say something. But I think there's like where there is an experience of color and distance, like, or like this direct visual impression. I think this is what they mean with form, and the same in the auditory world, like just the actual quality of the sound. And with that arises this valence, like positive or negative sentiment. And then the next level is that you get this labeling happening, like type of cognition. So there's not just black and buzzy, there's also like the idea of fly, or the idea of Sean or screen, keyboard, uh, maybe hunger, or like all these labels are buzzing inside or on top of or behind or in front of, like I don't know where to say it, but it co-arises with form and sentiment. There's also labeling happening. And then with these labels, they they come. This is probably when you were at this Cuenca Vipassana thing. He talks a lot about is it Sankharas, I think.
Yeah.
That's like the fourth level, which sometimes is translated as volition. It kind of means something like aggregates, also like a molecule of labels, or like habits of thought, like these ways where we like pick up a glass of water, we know how to use it. Like there's like a lot of affordances coming with the labels, and a lot of mental habits with our experience.
And so just to like for anyone at home that wants to experience this experientially, it's like, is it right now, whatever you're experiencing or noticing, you could actually, if you really pay attention, actually be able to see these different aspects you're pointing to. Like it's not just this kind of coherent experience. It's actually made of these kind of layers, you could say, or different levels of experience, but they're so subtle to our normal consciousness that they all seem the same thing, which is what samsara is, I suppose.
Yeah, I'd say that the fifth level is this mental chatter. This is often translated as consciousness. I don't think that's a good translation, but mental chatter, or like stories we weave, like this idea of who we are and what we're doing, like kind of language bound, but not necessarily language bound.
And I imagine people listening might be able to access that now, like the
And this
noticing
is
it
the
chatter that's come up.
the most salient part of most samsaric existence, or most normal
Mm.
everyday living, is that we're in these loops of thoughts of what we're going to do, or what we did, or who we are, or like who we need to call, like all these thoughts going on all the time. And part of the Buddhist practice is to sit still enough that you can kind of see through what are the labels we're using, what are the habits that are
Mm.
forming, what are the slight valences to experience, and what is there behind all the thoughts and labels. Because the tricky part initially is to actually find form behind the label, like, and find, like, and that's what I meant before with direct experience. Is you could understand it as form, like these direct sensory experiences, but there's also a direct experience of the label and of the chatter. Like those are not part of your experience or your direct experience, but it's like starting to feel into how all of these things are happening at the same time.
Yeah, so are you saying like if you're in your thoughts and like going about your day and you're like, oh yeah, I'm I'm doing well today, I should do this next, and that person's not a good person, that person is a good person. If you're in that, in a way, you're not in direct experience, you're kind of on the train.
Mm.
But you could start to notice those kinds of thoughts by paying attention to the experience. And then actually you are in direct experience because those, like everything is happening in direct experience. And I think actually that I find that quite enriching, and especially actually when I'm in the practice, the transformational connection, it becomes very psychedelic for me if I'm like noticing that, oh yeah, my thoughts as they come up, like if I allow one to come up now, it's like, oh, actually it's completely invisible. Like if you really experience
Mm.
it, and like I didn't actually know that properly until I kind of started noticing it as an experience. And yet somehow it also is an image, and quite a powerful image, and it shapes my perception. But that is also all happening kind of invisible. So it's an unbelievable intelligence that we kind of live within, even though it can feel like kind of annoying and painful if you're in it unconsciously. It's actually a kind of miracle.
It's very interesting when you start to tune into the co-arising of all of this. And I think like a way to get some taste of it is to really pick some object and attend it, like really sit with it, and until you see it as not that object, but just as itself. Like a cup is a label. Like there's some kind of abstraction we're doing to make two different shapes in the world be the same thing. But those are completely different arisings in the world, but they have some kind of thing in common. But what is it they don't have in common? What is the really special
Mm.
thing about just this arising?
Mm. Yeah, that's nice. I remember when I was first practicing, we had a Buddhist group in our university. It was like someone was trying to prove something to me or something, and they were saying something about look, there's three bottles here. And I was like, I looked at them and I was like, there's not actually. They're like three different things there.
Mm.
And maybe at a deeper level, there isn't actually anything. There's no distinction between anything here. But it's quite a change in perception to and but then also there can be quite a pleasure in discovering the thing as it is.
And I want to bring this back a bit to like the how this is relevant for surrendered leadership, or like how these
Mm.
inform each other in my life, in my experience.
Yeah.
And there's and like some of it is that despite having 15 years of practicing with sometimes psychedelics, more often meditation, there were a lot of like these things that only really landed for me when I practiced surrender leadership. Because it's so easy to stay within my own rumination or like my own like trying to figure stuff out when I'm sitting alone or doing my solitary exploration. And it wasn't until I had leaders like you and John and Peter in real time guiding me to include more of my experience. Like whenever I felt like, oh, but I can't, there's an obstacle to direct experience, be guided to like, yeah, but what is that obstacle? Like what is
Mm.
that experience? And and I mean, there's so many books I've read. There's like the path is the goal, or like the obstacle is the truth, or like, but it didn't
Yeah.
really. It wasn't until I got guided in real time as I was experiencing something as a block that it really started to
Mm.
generalize and make sense in my direct experience. So I
Yeah.
think there's some kind of really strong power in doing it collectively, communally. And then there are some parts that are more difficult, I think, collectively. They're like seeing, like really honing your concentration is difficult in a chaotic landscape,
Yeah.
or seeing through some of ego structures are difficult when because the ego does arise a lot in relation, or like as relation, or as protection from relation. Some ways that makes it easier to notice in relation, and in some ways it makes it more difficult. So for the first couple of years after I found surrender leadership, I kind of abandoned regular meditation. Um, but then a friend convinced me to go meet his teacher, as a Zen master, Reb Anderson. Did a retreat with him and kind of rediscovered the joy and the importance of also meditating.
Yeah. 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 I remember coming back to meditation and just finding it so, yeah, nourishing, even though it can also be like I I just feel a lot of joy when I practice relational practice. It's well, I didn't for the first 3 years, but I did, but not consistently like I do now. But maybe if I meditate more, I'll get to that. But it does come, but it's more of a discipline. But I get so much from yeah, having spent that silence time with myself, my experience.
I think that's also one of the strengths of the relational practices is that it's immediate, not for everyone, it seems, but for many people and for me, immediately pleasant and fun. Like not in every instance, sometimes it's really painful and it's more interesting than pleasant.
Yeah,
But generally, it's nice to come together with people and do something in connection, which is a lot easier to go and attend than going and attending, sitting, staring at a wall. for 2 hours or however long you decide.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And the well, it makes me wonder, like, how did you find the practice impacted you in terms of real relationship? Because there are practices that are like even more kind of mindful based. So you are in connection, but you're actually just really meditating together and you're using each other to kind of help you meditate. But there is something about transformational connection where it's like, no, really be in connection and see what's there and like there's an emphasis on it being real as well. And is that if you found that translates or like how have you found that impacting you relationally? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll start a little bit farther back with like the way I found my way into Buddhism mostly through Zen. And one difference between what you do at Vipassana and like some styles of meditation is that there you sit in a quiet room, secluded, and you have your eyes closed and you really pay attention to something. And in Zen, they sit with their eyes open and like kind of receiving the whole of experience. And as I've heard it, this is partly to make it more like your waking everyday life, because the goal is to bring this state of being or this receptive awareness into play in the world. And for me, like the next natural step is surrender leadership. Like you're trying to bring this open awareness into actual play. Like the practice ground is much more realistic. Like we've sometimes talked about it, you and me and others, as like the mixed martial arts of spiritual practices. It's like whatever your training is, you can come into surrender leadership and see, does it actually hold water? Stay equanimous when somebody is triggered with you, or when nothing is happening and you're just wondering like what the hell is going on? Why isn't anyone saying something? Like what happens to you?
Yeah.
How do you show up? And I think this was why I abandoned the other modalities when I found surrender leadership. I just found it to be much more relevant to practicing stuff that became useful in my regular life. And it's profoundly impacted my way of being being in relationship. I'm much more honest because I guess I don't shy away from having conflicts anymore, and that becomes difficult in some relationships, but but in my important relationships, or I guess those relationships where I can show up as me and somebody else shows up as them, and we kind of like clash a bit until we figure out we are in relation and how this can work. That's actual closeness. If we stay and avoid all the little things, we can pretend that we're friends, and it can be pleasant and fun. But there isn't that kind of intimacy that you can get when you actually allow yourself to be there, even though it might lead into some clash or some conflict. And I think that's one of the most like in terms of lived life, regular lived life, that's one of the most important parts, I think, for me in this practice, is how much it has helped me navigate conflict. And
Mm.
and that means that all the conflicts are much smaller. They're maybe a little bit more numerous, but much smaller and dealt with earlier before they grow.
Yeah.
Because I trust that leaning in and being honest actually, like I don't need to know beforehand. It I mean, it's a segue back into my experience there at the first SAS weekend. Like eventually what it led up to is like a realization that I have to take a leap of faith and start talking, even though I don't know how I'm gonna say the thing I want to say. But I can just think out loud with the group, and it's not, nobody's gonna attack. Well, if they attack me, everyone won't attack me at the same time. Even if they attack me all at once, I'm still not dead or like.
And if, well, it's easier, not always easy to do, but if you're there practicing, you're getting the opportunity to experience whatever ends up arising. And what inevitably we start to notice is like, oh, if I say this, everyone's going to hate me. And it's very rare that our worst fears are actually going to happen. But if we don't see it, we
Mhm.
will obviously not share if everyone's going to hate us. But it's not a very accurate map. It's just something we learned growing up to kind of keep us safe. But yeah, but it sounds like the more you've engaged, it's brought you to like, oh, actually, I'm willing to have a bit of conflict with those I'm close to. That now doesn't like feel like it's um, like scary or dangerous or to be avoided in some way, but it's an opportunity for intimacy. Yeah, and it sounds like that changes the game for you. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, some of it is a perspective change that I think didn't only come from surrender leadership, but also from reading Diane Hamilton, who's a
Mm.
mediator and teacher,
Yeah,
integrates
that's good.
and teacher. And I think she helped me see that even if I'm avoiding a conflict, there is still a conflict. It's just never going to be resolved.
Yeah.
Like the conflict doesn't start at the point of trying to resolve it, it starts way before.
Yeah.
And
That's
by
nice.
leaning
Yeah.
in, you have an actual experience, like an actual opportunity that it resolves. And otherwise, you're just living life with a lot of unresolved conflicts,
Yeah.
which is what I was doing.
And that can be internal as well. Like if you're not actively looking at ways that you're still maybe in shame or, and actually I agree with what you said. And it's almost necessary. Well, I'd say it's necessary and actually part of healthy development to create samsara or to create this kind of, yeah, thought loops. Because like a human being that doesn't have those structures, so usually in psychiatric wards, so it's like it's not that healthy not to have them.
Mm.
But then once you get to a certain, yeah, realization of like, yeah, but it also closes down a lot of your early aliveness. There's still trauma and pain you've got from the past, or there's still ways you're restricting what's possible for you, and you can take another step where this just gets integrated rather than is leading the show.
Yeah, it seems to be a sort of common, but I think faulty perspective that you want to get rid of your ego, or like that it just adds to internal strife or internal conflict, trying to rid yourself of something. And as you say, it's also socially useful and like in remembering to pay your bills and like go to work and like do the stuff that is required in a complex society.
Mm.
We do need these structures, but we don't need to be completely absorbed in them.
Mm.
Because then the thing with these structures, I think, is that they co-arise with tensions in the body, and like in the body mind, we could call it. And so when you're always in this, you never really relax. And I think that's part of today's rampant mental health problems and burnout, is that people have forgotten how to relax. We never just sit and digest, I guess, or like let things settle.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, is there anything else you would like to touch on, like, before we, yeah, finish this call? Like, we don't have to do everything in one call, but is there anything that comes up, especially around this theme of integrating what you've learned from Buddhism into the practice, but it could be anything, like what you're learning leading the practice now, or
I think one of the things that I'm paying attention to in leading the practice now is this, like, the subtleties around allowing conflict, doing it skillfully, and like doing it in a way that is generative. Like, there are sometimes we have people showing up at weekends that have some stronger difficulties. Like, there are people with personality disorders showing up sometimes, and like I think I haven't found exactly how I want to be with that. Like, on the one hand, I don't want to provoke their defenses in a way that makes a big problem in the space. And on the other hand, I do want to be honest with the rest of the participants of what I'm noticing. And I haven't solved that tension yet on how to do that skillfully.
yeah,
That's
that's a nice
one.
tension.
Mm.
Yeah.
And for me, it's not just about leading the practice. It's like, it also is like that those kinds of people come often to dominate the space. And it's also in life, I find myself sometimes in social circumstances where somebody is dominating a social situation and I don't like what the social situation is like. And the only recourse I have available to me in my current version of this personality structure is to leave.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out how to update, like, how can I go in and engage and try to steer the situation into something that is more pleasant or more connected.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, that's been a big journey for me as well. Because like in the early days, there was like seeing how strong this practice could be. It was like, wow, this is a psychotechnology where like it feels as strong as psychedelics. You get insights like from meditation, and you're working on your relational issues. So I got kind of seduced into thinking it's like, come on, let's bring in like, very complex trauma will meet that, and in a way you can, like when people show up authentically, it's unbelievable how intuitive people can meet. What I actually started to realize over time was actually, if I really feel into my truth, like, do I really feel like, first of all, for me, do I like being in a practice when it's like with someone who's got that big a challenge, like to be in the practice? Because I'm trying to like hold the practice and I want the practice to go well. And if someone's really struggling to stay with the principles of the practice, then I've got to decide, am I willing, how much am I willing to do that? And then I found out, yeah, there's a limit for me. And so it's not a judgment about someone, any kind of diagnosis or anything. It's just like, oh, are they able or willing to stay within the guidelines of the practice, even though those are very flexible, and there's still, it's clear when someone's really not trying to do that. But the other side of it was also a compassion. It was like, in my best sense as a leader, like if I was gonna really practice with this person, what would I want for them? And sometimes it's like, I don't want an open space. I don't want like the practice is very open and people are really allowed to play. And I want a higher number, like I want more time with them as an individual. But if we actually looked at what that structure is, it could be quite an expensive structure, or like, and they might not even want that if I suggest it. But it does feel like where, uh, yeah, it does feel like since I've like owned like that part of it, I've actually more often than not, well, I haven't had to do it that much, but just saying to someone, actually, I don't think this is a good fit. And that seems to be in service of me, them, and the quality of the, the weekend or whatever.
Would you do that in the start or middle of a weekend? Ask them to leave.
I think in if it's someone I've just met and we haven't had a chance to connect, I think it still can work really well, like especially if it's just one weekend. But if it starts to be more consistent or it's a deeper training, then I would want to really connect in deeply. The other thing that's really good for leaders to to keep in mind is sometimes people as transformational connection leaders can slip into slightly therapeutic perspective, which makes sense because we integrate a lot of therapeutic insights, but they can sometimes be like, okay, I think this person has complex trauma or whatever, some kind of, and then they excuse things like broken agreements, clearly like aggression, or usually just the simple things like there was a an agreement around time or finances or format, and they just don't follow it. But then there's like, oh yeah, but they've got this complex trauma, so that's okay. And then you're not treating them as in the same way as every other adult, like having adult agreements. And then I would say you're then slipping into a therapeutic and maybe not a very good therapeutic context. Um, but I don't know. This is just more for people listening than imagine for you. But having that in mind of like holding the line around we show up as adults, and if someone's struggling with that, there's no problem, but it might not be a good fit, and then I would be honest about that.
Mm.
How does that land with you? Just
No, I mean that is I would say congruent with my exploration of this tension is like what I want to experiment with is to just reveal more of my experience.
yeah, yeah, it was amazing with the practice because this excitement of like, oh, we can be present and we can show up, and so you can be quite, you can be primal, you can be a small child, you can be powerful, you can be expressive, and so it seems like, oh, and we can all be what we can be together. But then what came online was like, those people that know our field, it's like, oh yeah, we actually also need the insights around boundaries and what's a yes, what's a no,
Mm.
like how what are good agreements, and integrating like the outside world more cleanly into the structures has become a really part of the art. Yeah. And it seems like you're leading more in the world. You're really in the thick of that exploration.
Yeah.
So, yeah, any last things your side?
So, The only things I come to think of would take too much time to talk about, I think.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, well, maybe we can plant them as seeds for another conversation at a later point. So,
so one of the things is what I like an impression I got from you during the last sort of leadership week that I also shared with you of like that there's a and in terms of these levels, it's like on these labeling levels, there's a there's a there's like a whole system of labels, or like there's a way of seeing that you have developed that I
mm,
don't quite see yet.
mm,
And I think it's there's both an interest to talk about that and an interest to talk about like this how seeing is so informed by our labeling. Like these things, they're not structured that way as they were laid out now. There's like a lot of loops in between them. How the way we label things actually affects how it shows up in our direct experience, and like things we believe come alive. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about there as well.
yeah, yeah, that sounds fun. Yeah. Yeah, I was in a group yesterday trying to point out this like as people were sharing, it was getting quite intense for me because the way I was listening, it was like it felt like I was getting access to like deep longings and aliveness that I sense was actually coming through the expression. And then a few people in the group were like, I'm not feeling anything when someone's sharing. And so I was like exploring that with them. And then the interesting thing is like it's being able to hold the perspective that like feeling nothing is like no pressure to not have to feel anything. So that's the one side of it. So it's like if I've already got pressure on myself to be good at receiving people or to have a certain experience just because I see someone else having a strong experience, that's already some kind of tension. So like develop and it does you can't just click your fingers and be like, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. Like, it just seems after a certain amount of practice, the pressure to have to feel someone just goes. Like it's okay to be neutral. But as soon as you're okay to be neutral, it seems like you rarely are neutral. But but in the same way, like if you feel into neutral, that often takes you to more subtle states, and then you're more subtly experiencing what's there. But there was another thing I realized that if you have the intention to take in what someone says, like maybe you could do it now, and there's no pressure for it to feel a certain way. It seems like you then really can get access to feeling. I mean, I think it's the same thing I just said. It's like someone shares like something like, yeah, there was some share in the group like, uh, I'm imagining I'm going to feel alone when we get off this call because I feel so connected now. And it's so tempting when you hear that to actually respond to the form of what's been said. So it's like, I'm going to feel lonely later. So then you might come in and say like, oh, maybe you won't know, or like, or let's enjoy it now, or like you try to solve it because it's going to be, you don't want this person to have pain, or you're disturbed by the pain. But if you actually realize that you don't have to do anything and you don't just respond, and sometimes you've there's a judgment that you're not being a good person if you just don't do anything. But if you don't do anything, you suddenly get this feeling of like either like the longing or the experience of intimacy that this person might be having that would have them fear the future, or you
Mm.
get a hit of the fear, but it just comes up in your body. So it's like a kind of electricity or like an aliveness. So yeah, that was one thing that I was seeing just recently of like just those little nuances of kind of not putting pressure on your experience and then not trying to solve other people's experience, how that can just give you access to more of the direct experience.
Yeah, there's a like exactly on that topic, there's a meditation that I have developed that is
Mm.
brings that out a little bit. And I'm not going to run it now, but it's basically like paying attention. Like if you close your eyes, like your visual experience disappears, right? But
Yeah.
it didn't actually disappear. It's just now it's
Yeah.
dominated by black.
Yeah.
So interestingly, with vision, it's quite easy to see that the absence of vision is itself a color. Like the color black is actually the absence of vision in a way. And the color black is part of a vision. And in the same way, you can listen for silence, and silence is an auditory experience that you can actually experience.
Yeah.
And when you feel neutral, as you say, or like the absence of emotion, that is also an emotional experience. Like if you can find like the blackness of emotion or the blackness of sound or like the silence of, you can call it blackness or silence, but like the absence that has an actual quality,
Yeah.
that can be a gateway into this neutral experience. And a lot of nuance can start to come out.
Yeah. And it can sometimes even be an access to kind of a transcendent or non-dual
Mm.
experience. Like, oh man, I'm feeling neutral. It's like, yeah, you might be feeling kind of peace.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, there was actually that, and what made this the last part. I keep saying that in these talks, and I keep going that um, when there was a Mondo Zen practice where I was practicing like listening to a bell, and it's like, can you purely listen? And part of their teaching was like, no, I can't, because you just realize that you're kind of labeling it and you're trying to be good at listening. There's so much activity happening that you're not having a pure experience of listening. But I got a pointer from another approach that when I came back to Monday Zen, I much preferred it because it was like I actually was the perspective of like I can't not purely listen. I can't stop myself. Like, unless I go, no, 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 no. Like, then I will, I, I'll always hear it. So pure listening is actually the ground. And then, yeah, there are these layers over the top. But that gave me a kind of relaxation of like, it's already here, the pure listening, the pure witnessing, that it relaxed that efforting to kind of make myself purely listen or purely perceive. Yeah.
Then you can do that same thing towards all the other stuff that is was previously labeled as not purely listening. Then you can just purely receive your listening and the noise and like the labeling
Yeah.
and all that stuff.
Yeah. Which
That's
gets to your original point. So
yeah.
it's a nice little circle there. Cool. Well, great to have you here, and it's been really wonderful to have more time with you and that feel our personal connection growing and our practice growing. We also had a little conflict in in the week. That was quite an experience. Uh, yeah, just on that, there was another simple thing there. Like I remember, like feeling like, oh yeah, I'm in a trigger with Ina, Aina, and uh, and then I was like noticing that I was doing a kind of my kind of old Buddhist self, my like where I was like trying to meditate to like find what was going on in me and like, and that's not bad, that I was just introspecting, but then I was like, wait there, like where I felt the most aliveness in my practice recently is like, no, if I just lean in to, because you were quite close to me at the time, and I just actually experienced the connection with you, then suddenly the feeling was obvious. But when I was kind of on my own, kind of meditating to kind of try and work out why I was feeling kind of awkward and distant with you, and then and then also as I just shared that with you, just, oh yeah, there was some kind of disgust. I think I tried to share before when I was in my own kind of constructions, and it seemed like you were curious and available, but it didn't seem very clear to you what I was trying to share. But just coming in, and then I felt some disgust and anger, I think it was. And the way you just came in, it felt like your heart just was willing to receive that, even though disgust and anger are kind of uncomfortable. Yeah, and it felt like, yeah, just almost like a physical thing, just leaning towards you where the conflict is and willing to experience it was, yeah, was quite a shift for me with you.
I recognize how sometimes, well, I remember one vivid memory of being in a conflict with somebody and going to a friend, and I was going to tell him about what was going on. And I looked, I was like, I looked up to the corner of my eye and started to like tell him. And then I caught myself like, I'm not in relationship while talking. So I came back, opened myself to him, and surprised myself by saying something completely different, much more
Mm.
true about what was going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And that may be where, yeah, Buddhism and this relational practice can really serve each other, because this insight of like, yeah, simply be in is just as powerful as, yeah, this Buddhist pointer of like, yeah, be really in your experience, like sit still and really discover what you are. This is like, yeah, let's discover what we are.
Mm.
Well, big love. And yeah, till soon.